Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're heading back, way back actually, to the dawn of agriculture.
The Neolithic Revolution,
Right.
specifically in the southern Levant.
Exactly. And you usually picture this story of our clever ancestors gradually figuring out farming over time.
That's the standard narrative, yeah. Human ingenuity driving everything forward.
But hold that thought.
Yeah.
Because we've got some sources today that might just flip that whole idea around.
Mm-hmm.
We're digging into a really fascinating study. It's from the Journal of Soils and Sediments, led by Professor Amos Frumkin. And there's another related paper, same journal, looking at how wildfires can just completely reshape landscapes.
It's incredible power, those fires.
So our mission today, we want to explore if that big shift to farming was, purely down to human smarts. Or if something else, something environmental was maybe the real push.
That's the core question, isn't it? We often focus on human innovation, the aha moments.
Right.
But what if the environment itself was playing a much more active role? Maybe even a disruptive one.
Okay, so this Frumkin study, it really challenges that traditional view, the sort of human-centric story of agriculture.
Absolutely. It throws a pretty big wrench in the works, suggesting that major natural climate shifts might have been the primary catalyst here.
The primary catalyst,
Well,
okay. And the core of this new idea hinges on what exactly?
So the central argument is that these significant climate changes triggered, catastrophic wildfires. And these led to massive soil erosion.
Wow.
And the researchers are proposing that these environmental disasters weren't just, happening in the background. They might have been the main drivers forcing people towards agriculture.
Catastrophic wildfires.
Yeah.
Causing the agricultural revolution. That sounds like a pretty bold claim. What's the evidence? How do they back that up?
Well, they pulled together several lines of evidence, quite compelling ones, actually. Let's start with the smoking gun, so to speak. The fires themselves.
Okay.
There's evidence for these incredibly intense wildfires sweeping through the southern Levant in the early Holocene. We're talking around 8,000 years ago.
Okay. Intense fires 8,000 years ago. What tells them that? What are they looking at?
One of the key things is micro-charcoal. Tiny bits of burnt stuff trapped in lake sediments. They looked at Lake Hula.
Right. Lake beds preserve history like that.
Exactly. And what they found were these extreme spikes in charcoal concentration. I mean, get this. The amount of charcoal suggests burning was roughly 3 times the normal level for the Holocene.
3 times.
3 times. Around 10,000 years ago. It gives you a sense of the scale. Just massive fires. Unfortunately, the record has a bit of a gap, a hiatus, so we don't see the exact end of that peak.
Still, 3 times the norm.
Yeah.
That's definitely not just a few campfires getting out of control.
Yeah.
So what lit the match? Was it people? Early humans suddenly burning everything down?
That's the big question, obviously. But the study suggests it's more likely down to natural causes, specifically a surge in lightning strikes.
Lightning?
Yeah, from dry thunderstorms. And these seem to be linked to shifts in the Earth's orbit, which affected solar radiation back in the early Holocene.
Wait, orbital shifts causing more lightning?
Ah!
Okay, that's fascinating.
It really is. These weren't your typical thunderstorms bringing rain. They were dry, sparking fires. And it seems they peaked roughly between 8 and 8.6 thousand years ago.
So a specific window of intense, dry, lightning-filled storms.
Exactly. And connecting it to the bigger climate picture, this likely represents a sort of temporary push of southern weather systems further north into the Levant than usual.
So not just a local fluke, a regional climate pattern shift, creating these tinderbox conditions. Okay, so massive fires sweep the land. What happens next?
Well, this is where the next piece of the puzzle comes in. The soil. Massive erosion and then redeposition.
Makes sense. Fires burn off all the plants, the vegetation cover.
Nothing left to hold the soil together, so when the rains eventually came, whoosh.
The soil just washes away. What evidence tells us that happened?
They looked at speleothems, cave formations like stalagmites from Sorek and Harnoff caves.
Leach's archives again.
Pretty much. Their chemical makeup, specifically carbon and strontium isotopes, changes depending on what's happening on the surface above the cave.
Okay.
So they found high delta 13C values, especially a sharp peak in Sorek Cave back then. That suggests much less vegetation cover, sparse.
Fewer plants?
And they also found low strontium isotope ratios, low 87S RD6S here. That points towards loss of the topsoil. Think of it like the signature of the topsoil disappearing from the water dripping into the cave.
So the caves are recording this story. Plants disappearing, topsoil eroding from the hillsides above. That's incredible. Any other evidence for the erosion?
Yep. They also used OSL dating, that's optically stimulated luminescence, a way to date sediments on soils at a site called Ramat Rahel.
Yeah.
And they found the fewest soil ages dating to that early Holocene period, which basically means the older soils weren't sticking around. They were likely being stripped away. Rapid degradation.
Okay, so the hillsides are getting stripped bare, losing tons of soil. Where did it all go?
Downhill. Into the lower lying areas, the valley basins, particularly the lower Jordan Valley.
Ah, okay. And here's the crucial connection. This eroded material built up into these thick layers of new, often fertile soil, reworked soil, and it frequently ended up sitting right on top of the older sediments left by Lake Leeson, that big, late Pleistocene lake. Some of those top layers date to around 13,000 years ago.
And this is where the agriculture connection comes in stronger, right? These new fertile zones.
Exactly, because the study highlights that the earliest major Neolithic settlements, we're talking big names like Jericho, Gilgal, Netiv Hagbud down in the Jordan Valley, also Matsa up in the hills, they are clustered right on top of these thick deposits of fertile, reworked soil.
So they didn't just settle anywhere. They specifically targeted these newly formed fertile patches created by the erosion.
It looks that way. The pattern is pretty clear. It suggests a very direct link. Environmental catastrophe leads to erosion, which creates fertile pockets, and that's where people settle down and start farming.
Wow. Fires clear the land, erosion creates fertile hotspots, people move in. It's quite a sequence. But farming needs water too, doesn't it? Especially in that region.
Good point. And that's the next critical piece they looked at, the dead sea levels.
As a kind of regional rain gauge.
Sort of, yeah. It reflects the overall water balance rainfall versus evaporation. And the evidence shows a significant dry period hitting around 8.5 to 7.8 thousand years ago.
Oh, so it got drier too.
Yes, including a documented rapid drop in the lake level around 8,100 years before present. So right in that same time frame.
And this dry spell, did it line up with anything else happening globally?
It did, and this is really interesting. It coincides pretty well with the famous 8.2 K event, that cold, dry snap that hit the northern hemisphere.
Ah, the 8.2 kiloyear event. I know that one.
Right, so the thinking is that this larger climate hiccup might have amplified the effects locally in the southern Levant, made the fires worse, the drought more intense.
So it's like a double whammy.
Yeah.
Climate shifts cause more lightning and fires, and then a major drought kicks in, possibly linked to this bigger global event. That sounds pretty rough if you're relying on hunting and gathering.
Exactly. Your resources would become much less reliable, very precarious.
Now, the study does tackle the human angle on the fires, doesn't it? The idea that maybe people did start them.
Yes, it addresses that directly. They acknowledge, humans in the Levant had been using fire for ages, for cooking, clearing land, hunting, probably. But the scale we're talking about here, these incredibly intense, widespread fires, seem to have persisted for a significant chunk of the Neolithic. The study argues it's just highly improbable that localized human activities could cause that level of sustained, environmentally devastating fire regime across the region.
The sheer scale points away from humans as the main ignition source for this particular period of intense burning.
That's the argument. The environmental changes were so profound, it suggests a much larger natural driver was at play.
Okay, so it wasn't just our ancestors suddenly getting careless with fire. Which brings us back to that key phrase from the study you mentioned. Necessity, not just innovation. Can you unpack that a bit more?
Yeah, this is where it really shifts the perspective. Instead of seeing agriculture as purely this brilliant idea that humans gradually developed and adopted because it was, better.
The progress narrative.
Right. The study proposes it might have been much more of a response, a reaction to a major environmental crisis. The landscape changed so dramatically, forests gone, soil moved, water scarcer, that the old ways of life, hunting and gathering, might have become incredibly difficult, maybe even impossible in some areas.
So it wasn't let's invent farming. It was more like, uh-oh, we need a new way to get food now.
That's the idea. Agriculture becomes a necessity forced upon people by environmental collapse, rather than just a clever invention adopted at leisure. It's adaptation born from crisis.
Necessity being the mother of invention, quite literally here perhaps, this period, around 8,200 years ago, it really sounds like a major turning point, an environmental tipping point.
That's how the study frames it, yes. This intense fire regime driven by climate shifts seems to have fundamentally reshaped the environment, pushing ecosystems and human societies past a critical threshold.
And they mentioned this wasn't necessarily a one-off type of event in the region's deep history. Something similar might have happened even earlier.
Exactly. They briefly touch on evidence from the last interglacial period, that's MIS 5e, much further back in time. And data from that period also shows high charcoal levels and similar kinds of isotopic shifts in cave formations. It suggests that these kinds of large-scale, climate-driven environmental shakeups, including intense fires, might be sort of a recurring pattern in the southern Levant's history.
Wow. Okay, so let's try and pull this all together then. What we're seeing is evidence for massive climate-driven wildfires around 8,000 years ago in the southern Levant.
Driven potentially by lightning from orbital shifts,
Right. These fires cause widespread soil erosion. Fertile soil then piles up in the valleys.
creating new arable land, basically.
And this happens alongside significant dry period, maybe made worse by that global 8.2 event.
Making resources scarce.
And then crucially, the first big farming settlements pop up.
Yeah.
Exactly in those newly fertile valley hotspots.
The timing and location line up remarkably well.
So the argument is, this isn't just coincidence. These environmental disasters, the fires, the erosion, the drought, may have been the actual catalyst, the thing that forced the shift to agriculture.
That's the core takeaway from the study, yes. It really pushes back against that traditional picture of a purely human-driven agricultural revolution.
It certainly does. It makes you think much more about the sheer power of natural forces in shaping, well, everything, the whole course of human history in ways we might often overlook.
Absolutely. It's fascinating how something seemingly abstract, like, wobbles in the Earth's orbit affecting lightning patterns, can translate into such concrete and dramatic consequences for people living on the ground thousands of years later.
Yeah. So wrapping up this deep dive, the key point is this. The Neolithic Revolution in the southern Levant, that huge shift to farming, might have been kicked off, or at least significantly shaped, by this intense period of climate-driven wildfires and the landscape changes that followed.
The erosion creating fertile zones, the drying climate adding pressure. It paints a picture where farming becomes a crucial adaptation strategy.
It challenges the human geniuses model and really emphasizes how environmental pressures can be incredibly powerful drivers of major historical transitions. It's not just about invention. It's often about response, about adaptation.
Precisely. It's a reminder that history unfolds in this dynamic interplay between us and the planet. Human agency matters, of course, but so do these powerful natural forces.
Okay, so here's something to maybe chew on after this. Think about other big moments in history. Could other seemingly natural events, maybe weird weather, volcanic eruptions, even disease outbreaks linked to environmental change, have had unexpected massive impacts on how human societies developed or changed course? Where else might we be underestimating the environment's role as a driver of change?
That's a great question to ponder.
Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.